It is time now for another installment of our Bad Ideas series. Now imagine this. Imagine you owned a business in your state and your state came in and they forced you to hire only union workers, but then told you that the state would also be negotiating the contracts for them. Well, that's exactly what is proposed in the state of California. It's a model for a policy that could be heading your way vis-a-vis the Biden administration. California has also ramped up a tax on the gig economy that can have far-reaching impacts on costs, wages, and even the supply chain. Will Swaim is the president of the California Policy Institute, and he is here for more on this. Will, thank you so much for being here. Bad idea number one is something called AB 5, which was written actually by a Teamsters executive. Tell us what it does. Okay. Okay, I think you're muted, Will.
Sorry. So Assembly Bill 5 was passed in 2019, and it was designed by the Teamsters basically to attack the gig economy in Silicon Valley. So these are, most people are familiar with like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash. The idea was that you could force these people out of a freelance independent contractor status and then move them into full employment with companies like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash. But it also swept up, Assembly Bill 5 did, it also swept up every other independent contractor in the state, including, for instance, 70,000 independent truckers. So if you are a self-employed trucker, you own your own truck, one or two of them, and you do business in California, you can no longer work independently under AB 5. You have to go to work for a company that can employ you as an employee. That would force you into companies generally that are unionized. And that, of course, is also the goal of AB 5. It was always intended, Tom, to drive people out of freelance status at Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, or in independent trucking, or as translators, photographers, and graphic designers, and force them into full employment where they could be taxed and regulated. Yeah,
and here's the thing. So that this impacts the supply chain. We have a supply chain crisis. We have a trucker shortage. Now you're going to have truckers who are going to leave the state of California, and they're going to make their living someplace else, and that is, that ultimately makes the supply chain worse, and certainly it drives up costs. Now, here's the interesting thing: there are carve-outs that the Democrats in California put in this for newspapers. Newspapers hire stringers and freelancers, but they're not included in this. Interestingly, talk to us about that.
That's right. So it became clear that the bill was going to face real opposition from editorial pages in California, even among very liberal newspapers. The editorial perspective was that this would be a disaster for their industry. And so the author, Lorena Gonzalez, who had been a Teamsters official before she went into the assembly and then became one again just a little bit ago, her idea was, we really need good publicity. We can't afford to have the newspapers against us, so we're simply going to exempt them. The newspapers did a 180. It was absolutely remarkable to watch. The best example of this was Vox, the news media company. Vox was absolutely opposed to AB 5. Then they were for it when they got a carve out. When it passed again, they saw that it might still affect them, and they came out against it again. So the news media has kind of been all over the place on this, but now has a permanent carve-out and is a reliable supporter of this really crazy bill.
All right, let's move on to something called AB 257. Now, that is forcing the unionization of fast food workers. What are they trying to do here?
Well, for decades, unions have been trying to organize fast food industry workers without any success. And the reasons for that are numerous, but the most obvious is that most people don't go into fast food as a career. They go in because it's a quick, easy step into the economy. And from there, you could rise up to other positions, even in that industry, as like a supervisor, manager, and ultimately even perhaps a franchise owner. So very few people who work the counter or work the short order stove at the back have any interest in joining a union. They want to move up quickly. So unable to organize these people, the state stepped in and did for unions what they could not do for themselves. The state declared itself the labor representative of workers in the fast food industry.
That is absolutely incredible. So the state is actually going to negotiate the contracts for these new unions, and at the end of the day, You're going to have fewer people employed. Most of these folks are lower income and minority or young people. You're going to have fewer workers, and those folks are going to have lower income. And obviously the government in California doesn't care, because they're just going to they'll put them back on welfare. They don't want them to be in the economy. And it's very important to point out, because I do have to run, unfortunately, Will, but it's very important to point out both of these things are being considered as regulations in the Biden Department of Labor, that these could be national policies. So folks, pay attention to these bad ideas, because they could be heading your way. Will Swaim, California Policy Institute. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Tom. Be well.